Inside your head right now, a silent narrator is likely shaping your reality with words only you can hear. As we explore these calming facts about the inner voice, please gently like and subscribe for more peaceful nights of learning. This phenomenon, known formally as inner speech, is one of the most constant companions of the human experience, acting as a perpetual monologue that narrates your waking life. For most people, this voice feels undeniably auditory, possessing a specific tone, pace, and volume. Yet, it generates no physical sound waves that can be recorded by a microphone. It is a phantom sound, a hallucination of hearing that is entirely controlled by your own consciousness, living within what scientists call the phonological loop. This internal loop allows you to rehearse information, like a phone number or a grocery list, keeping the data alive in your working memory through silent repetition. While it feels like a simple echo of your thoughts, this voice is actually a complex simulation of the physical act of speaking, engaging many of the same brain regions that light up when you talk aloud, specifically Broca's area, which handles speech production. It is a private universe of language where you are both the speaker and the listener, a dual role that defines much of your sense of self and helps you navigate the complexities of the world without ever uttering a single word to the outside air. Because this voice does not need to move physical muscles or coordinate breath, the speed at which it operates is significantly faster than your ability to speak out loud. When you talk to another person, you are limited by the mechanical movements of your jaw, tongue, and lips, which generally caps speech at around 150 words per minute. However, your inner voice is unbound by these physical friction points, allowing it to race ahead at a velocity that some researchers estimate to be closer to 4,000 words per minute in its most condensed form. This rapid pace is possible because inner speech is often abbreviated. It does not require the full grammatical structure of formal language because you already know what you mean. You can skip the connecting words, the prepositions, and the formalities, compressing complex ideas into lightning-fast bursts of verbal thought. It is a kind of linguistic shorthand, a condensed speech described by psychologist Lev Vygotsky, where a single internal word might carry the weight and meaning of an entire paragraph of external description, allowing your mind to process life at a speed that the physical body can simply never match. This rapid internal narrator acts as the conductor of your cognitive orchestra, playing a critical role in what psychologists call executive function. Without this silent voice, the ability to plan for the future, impulse control, and complex problem-solving would be significantly diminished. When you are deciding what to wear in the morning or strategizing how to approach a difficult conversation, you are essentially running a simulation in your mind using this voice to test out different scenarios. It serves as a scratch pad for your brain, holding information in a temporary storage space while you manipulate it to find a solution. This is why, when you are trying to perform a difficult task that requires deep concentration, like assembling furniture or solving a math problem, your inner voice often slows down and becomes more deliberate, sometimes even spilling out of your mouth as a whisper. By verbalizing the steps internally, you are physically tethering your attention to the task at hand, using language to create a structure for your thoughts that prevents your focus from drifting away into the abstract noise of the subconscious mind. Interestingly, even though this inner voice is silent to the outside world, your body often reacts as if you are actually speaking. This phenomenon is known as subvocalization, a process where your brain sends signals to the muscles in your throat and larynx, causing them to make microscopic movements that mirror the words you are thinking. These movements are so tiny that they cannot be felt and are invisible to the naked eye, but sensitive electromyography equipment placed on the throat can actually detect the electrical activity of your inner monologue. In the 1950s, researchers found that when subjects were asked to recite a poem silently in their heads, their vocal cords engaged in the same rhythm as the poem. This suggests that thinking in words is not a purely mental abstraction, but a suppressed physical action. Your body is essentially rehearsing the speech, preparing to say the words, but inhibiting the final command to push air through the vocal cords. It implies that the line between thinking and doing is much thinner than we imagine, and that every silent thought is, in a way, a physical action that your body keeps secret. Despite how universal this experience feels to those who have it, it's a fascinating and somewhat recent discovery that not everyone possesses an inner voice. There is a wide spectrum of internal experience, and some individuals live with a mind.
This sophisticated internal system is not something we are born with, but rather a skill that is learned and internalized during childhood. Developmental psychologists, particularly those following the work of Vygotsky, have observed that very young children do not have an inner voice. Instead, they have private speech, where they talk to themselves out loud while playing or solving problems. If you watch a toddler, they will often narrate their actions, saying things like, "Now the car goes here," or "blue block on top." This is the external scaffolding of thought. Around the age of 7, this external narration begins to fade, receding inwards to become the silent inner speech we experience as adults. It suggests that our private inner world is actually a deeply social product. We learn to think by first learning to speak to others, and then we turn that conversation inward. The voice you hear in your head is, in many ways, the internalized echo of the caregivers and teachers who helped you learn language, a collection of external sounds that have been absorbed to form the core of your private identity. When the demands of the external world fade away, such as when you are lying in bed waiting for sleep, the inner voice often becomes the primary occupant of your consciousness, triggered by the brain's default mode network. This is a network of interacting brain regions that becomes active when a person is not focused on the outside world, and it is intimately linked to the narrative self. This is the biological home of daydreaming, mind-wandering, and self-reflection. In this state, the inner voice is no longer a tool for solving immediate problems, but becomes a storyteller, weaving together memories of the past, simulations of the future, and hypothetical scenarios. It can drift from a song stuck in your head to a conversation you had years ago to a plan for tomorrow's breakfast. While this wandering mind can sometimes keep us awake, it is also a crucial function for consolidation, helping the brain to integrate the day's experiences into the long-term story of who you are, stitching together the fragmented moments of life into a cohesive, flowing narrative that feels like you. Understanding the origin of this internal narrator requires us to look back at how we first learned to speak, not just to others, but to ourselves, because psychological researchers, most notably the Soviet psychologist Lev Vygotsky, proposed that our inner voice does not start internally at all, but rather begins its life completely outside of our bodies. Vygotsky theorized that the dialogue we hold in the privacy of our minds is actually internalized social speech, a remnant of the way our caregivers spoke to us and the way we learned to communicate with the world. When a young child is solving a puzzle or tying their shoes, they will often narrate the process out loud, saying things like, "The red block goes here," or "Loop the bunny ears," mirroring the instructions they've heard from parents. Over time, as the brain matures, this external narration isn't abandoned, it is simply absorbed, folded inward like a piece of origami, until the sound is turned off, but the linguistic structure remains, creating the silent companion you hear today. This process of internalization is not instantaneous, but occurs gradually during a specific developmental window, typically between the ages of 3 and 7, a period often described by developmental psychologists as the era of private speech. If you observe children in this age range, you might notice that their self-talk undergoes a fascinating transformation where it begins to resemble a fading radio signal, moving from shouting to conversing, then to whispering, and finally to silent lip movements before disappearing entirely from the surface. During this transition, the grammar of the speech actually changes. It becomes more abbreviated and telegraphic because the speaker and the listener are now the same person, so the mind no longer needs to spell out every detail in full sentences. The sentence, "I need to find the blue truck under the bed," might eventually be compressed in the mind to a single abstract flash of meaning, or the simple keyword, blue truck, creating the rapid-fire shorthand style that characterizes adult inner speech. It is a common misconception that talking to oneself is a sign of instability, but in the context of child development, the presence of audible private speech is actually a strong indicator of cognitive health and executive function. Research has shown that children who talk to themselves the most while performing difficult tasks, such as rigorous math problems or complex pattern matching, tend to perform better than their silent peers, suggesting that the voice acts as a cognitive steering wheel that helps focus attention. This phenomenon highlights that the voice inside your mind is fundamentally a problem-solving tool, a mechanism for self-regulation that allows the brain to hold information in the phonological loop, a component of working memory that acts like a temporary recording tape, so that complex ideas can be manipulated and examined without vanishing into the ether of forgetfulness. The biological hardware required to support this silent internal monologue is incredibly complex and relies on the maturation of a specific neural pathway known as the dorsal stream, often referred to in neurology as the where or how pathway. This bundle of nerve fibers connects the auditory cortex, where we process sounds, with the motor areas of the frontal lobe, which are responsible for speech production. In young children, this connection is still developing, which is why they have difficulty inhibiting the motor act of speaking. They essentially have to say what they think because the mute button in their brain hasn't been wired yet. As the dorsal stream matures and gains a protective coating of myelin, the transmission of signals becomes faster and more efficient, allowing the brain to send a prediction of speech, known as an efference copy, to the auditory cortex without actually triggering the muscles of the mouth and throat, effectively creating the illusion of sound without the physical vibration of air. This link between the voice in your head and the physical act of speaking is so strong that for most of human history, the concept of silent reading was practically non-existent, and reading was almost exclusively a public oral performance. In his Confessions, St. Augustine famously expressed shock and wonder upon seeing Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan, reading without moving his lips, noting that his eyes scanned the page and his heart sought out the meaning, but his voice was silent and his tongue was still, a sight that was considered an anomaly in the 4th century. This historical shift mirrors the developmental shift in our own lives. When we first learn to read, we must convert the visual symbols into spoken sounds to understand them, a process that eventually becomes internalized. Even as proficient adult readers, electromyography sensors placed on the throat can often detect microscopic, undetectable movements in the larynx, known as subvocalization, proving that your body is still subtly speaking the words you are reading right now.
The richness and texture of your inner voice may also be heavily influenced by the specific way your parents or guardians conversed with you during those critical early years. A concept explored deeply by psychologist Charles Fernyhough. He suggests that the quality of elaborative reminiscing, the way parents help children construct stories about their past, lays the architectural blueprint for the child's own internal narrative style. Parents who ask open-ended, detailed questions like, "What did the tiger look like at the zoo?" rather than simple yes or no questions, encourage the child to build a more complex, descriptive, and dialogic inner voice. This means that the conversational style you hold with yourself in the quiet of the night is likely a direct echo of the conversational patterns you were immersed in decades ago, a lingering acoustic fingerprint of your earliest social interactions. For many children, the development of this internal dialogue manifests in the creation of imaginary companions, a phenomenon that was once pathologized but is now understood as a sophisticated form of practice for inner speech.
Creating an invisible character requires the child to simulate a separate consciousness, holding up both sides of a conversation and predicting how a distinct personality would respond, which is essentially a workout for the brain's social centers. These interactions are often the first time a human being consciously splits their internal monologue into a dialogue, creating a self and an other within the safety of their own mind. This capacity to host a conversation with a phantom entity is the precursor to the adult ability to play devil's advocate, to rehearse difficult conversations before they happen, or to view a problem from multiple perspectives without leaving the comfort of one's own thoughts. As we grow older, one of the primary functions of this maturing inner voice is behavioral inhibition, which is essentially the ability to tell oneself, "Stop," or "Don't do that," in the face of an impulse. In the famous marshmallow test experiments, where children were promised a second treat if they could resist eating the first one for a short period, the children who successfully waited often used private speech strategies, singing little songs to themselves or repeating the rules out loud to bridge the gap of time. This demonstrates that the inner voice acts as a temporal bridge, allowing us to override immediate sensory desires in favor of long-term goals that our inner narrator describes to us. Without this internalized verbal instruction, we would be far more reactive creatures, driven entirely by the stimulus of the present moment rather than the abstract promises of the future that our inner narrator describes to us. The universality of the inner voice is further illuminated by looking at how it develops in those who are born profoundly deaf, proving that the phenomenon is not about sound waves but about language itself. Deaf individuals who are raised using sign language report experiencing an inner sign or a visual motor monologue, where they visualize hand movements or feel the ghost of signs in their muscles rather than hearing an acoustic voice. This reveals that the brain is indifferent to the medium of communication, whether it is spoken English, tonal Mandarin, or American Sign Language. The brain will co-opt whatever linguistic system is available to create an internal interface for thought. The voice inside is therefore not strictly a voice at all, but a stream of linguistic symbols, a ticker tape of meaning that uses the memory of movement and sight just as easily as it uses the memory of sound. Finally, the full maturity of the inner voice coincides with the development of theory of mind, the psychological milestone where a young person realizes that other people have thoughts, beliefs, and knowledge that are different from their own. As the internal monologue becomes more robust, it allows us to simulate the minds of others, creating a private theater where we can guess what someone else is thinking or feeling. This ability to hear the thoughts of others in our imagination is inextricably linked to our ability to hear ourselves. We cannot effectively model the consciousness of another person until we have established a stable, private consciousness of our own. It is this reflective capacity, the ability to detach from the world and retreat into a private simulation, that marks the completion of the inner voice's development, transforming it from a simple tool for naming objects into the complex philosophical narrator that defines the human experience. One of the most fundamental roles played by this silent narrator is its function as a kind of auditory workspace, a system psychologists refer to as the phonological loop. Imagine your mind as a desk. Without the voice, you could only look at things, but the voice allows you to pick them up and hold them in place. When you try to remember a phone number or a passcode just long enough to type it in, you're engaging this specific loop. It consists of two distinct parts: a phonological store, which acts like an inner ear holding sound-based information for 1 or 2 seconds, and an articulatory rehearsal process, which acts like an inner voice repeating the information to refresh the memory trace. Without this constant silent repetition, the memory would fade almost instantly, like breath on a window pane. This is why if someone interrupts you while you're mentally repeating a grocery list, the entire list often vanishes. The loop has been broken. This mechanism is so ancient and vital that it's considered one of the primary foundations of human working memory, allowing us to stack thoughts on top of one another rather than letting them slip away into the dark. This internal workspace does more than just hold numbers. It allows for a profound cognitive ability known as mental time travel, specifically the simulation of future events. When you use your inner voice to plan your day, you're not merely listing tasks, you're running a sophisticated simulation of reality before it happens. Your brain uses the inner voice to draft a script for the future, testing out different scenarios without the risk of real-world consequences. You might mentally rehearse asking for a raise, playing out your boss's reaction and your subsequent counter-arguments. This is the voice acting as a playwright, constructing hypothetical futures so you can navigate them more safely when they actually arrive. Research suggests that people who report a diminished inner voice often struggle more with this type of autobiographical planning. They can recall the past and know what needs to be done, but the rich narrative rehearsal of the future feels less accessible, suggesting that our internal monologue is the primary tool we use to bridge the gap between who we are now and who we want to be tomorrow.
Beyond planning, the voice inside your mind serves as a crucial scaffold for complex problem solving and logic. If you have ever struggled with a difficult math problem or tried to assemble a piece of furniture with confusing instructions, you likely noticed your inner voice becoming louder and more deliberate. This is not a sign of madness, but a sign of cognitive heavy lifting. This phenomenon is deeply tied to the theories of developmental psychologist Lev Vygotsky, who proposed that inner speech is the internalization of social speech. When we are children, we solve problems by talking out loud. As we master the world, that speech folds inward. However, when a task becomes difficult, the voice resurfaces to help us structure our thoughts. It segments a continuous stream of information into manageable chunks, labeling each step of the problem. By verbally articulating the steps silently, first I do this, then I connect that, you are essentially providing your brain with a user manual that you are writing in real time, focusing your attention and preventing your mind from wandering off the task at hand. This focusing effect extends to one of the most vital functions of the human mind: impulse control and self-regulation. The voice is not just a commentator, it is often a restrictor. When you see a delicious but unhealthy treat and think, "I shouldn't eat that," or when you feel a flash of anger but tell yourself, "Calm down, don't say anything," you are using inner speech to override your primal instincts. This is known as inhibitory control. The brain areas involved in generating this internal command to stop are closely linked to the motor cortex, suggesting that saying "don't do it" in your head is a physical action that blocks another physical action. Studies involving tasks where participants must inhibit a response show that when people are prevented from using their inner voice, such as being asked to repeat a nonsense word aloud while performing the task, their ability to control their impulses drops significantly. The voice acts as a brake pedal for the mind, a necessary counterweight to the constant stream of desires and reactions that flow through us. This regulatory voice is perhaps most active during the solitary act of reading, a process that feels silent but is chemically and physically noisy. When you read a book, you are likely engaging in subvocalization, which is the internal speech associated with reading. Even though your lips aren't moving, your brain is sending signals to your vocal cords, tongue, and larynx that mimic the muscular movements of speech, just at a microscopic level that produces no sound. This isn't a bad habit, it is often essential for comprehension. While speed readers try to suppress this voice to consume text faster, research indicates that eliminating subvocalization can hurt your ability to understand complex or nuanced passages. The inner voice breathes life into the text, providing the prosody, the rhythm, stress, and intonation that the written words lack. It allows you to hear the sarcasm in a character's dialogue or the sorrow in a poem. I'd love to know, speaking of reading quietly in the dark, when you read a novel late at night, do you assign different, distinct voices to the characters in your mind, or does everything sound like your own thinking voice? Let me know in the comments, as it's fascinating how we cast the audio plays in our heads.
Navigating the social world requires a different kind of inner computation, often referred to as theory of mind, and your inner voice is the engine behind it. Theory of mind is the ability to attribute mental states, beliefs, intents, desires, and knowledge to others, and to understand that they have minds different from your own. We frequently use our inner speech to simulate other people's perspectives. When you think, if I say this, she will probably feel hurt because she is sensitive about that topic, you are running a social simulation using your verbal working memory. You are essentially holding a conversation with a phantom version of another person to predict social outcomes. This internal role-playing allows us to navigate complex social hierarchies and maintain relationships. Without the ability to verbally represent the thoughts of others within our own private mental landscape, our capacity for empathy and sophisticated social interaction would be significantly blunted. We are constantly debating invisible audiences to ensure we remain connected to the real ones. This internal debate is our primary mechanism for emotional regulation, specifically through a technique psychologists call distanced self-talk. When we are in the grip of strong anxiety or sadness, our inner voice often swirls in a repetitive loop of "I am worried" or "I am hurt." However, the voice has a built-in release valve. Research has shown that shifting the language of your inner voice from the first person "I" to the second or third person, using "you" or your own name, can drastically reduce emotional distress. This linguistic shift creates a psychological distance, tricking the brain into processing the emotion as if it were happening to someone else. It engages the wise, objective reasoning centers of the brain rather than the reactive emotional centers. The voice acts as a brake pedal for the mind, a necessary counterweight to the constant stream of desires and reactions that flow through us.
The utility of the inner voice extends to how we move between different tasks in our daily lives, a function known as task switching. The modern world requires us to constantly shift our focus from one activity to another, a process that is cognitively expensive and tiring for the brain. Inner speech acts as a catalyst for these switches. When you finish writing an email and prepare to cook dinner, you might say to yourself, "Okay, email done, time to start chopping vegetables." This verbal label helps the brain clear the board of the previous rule set and load the new one. It serves as a cue that reconfigures your neural networks for the new activity. Studies have shown that when people are blocked from using inner speech during task switching exercises, they are slower and make more errors. The voice acts like a switchboard operator, plugging and unplugging the cords of attention to ensure that our mental resources are directed to the right place at the right time. For those looking to master a physical skill, from playing the piano to swinging a tennis racket, the inner voice splits into two distinct functional styles: instructional self-talk and motivational self-talk. Instructional self-talk deals with the mechanics of movement. It is the voice that says, "Keep your wrist straight" or "Bend your knees." This type of inner speech helps focus attention on specific technical elements of performance and is crucial during the early stages of learning when a movement is not yet automatic. As we become experts, this voice often fades, replaced by motivational self-talk. Phrases like, "You've got this," or "Stay focused." Interestingly, relying too much on instructional voice when you are already an expert can actually hurt performance, a phenomenon known as choking, where you overanalyze a process that should be fluid. The voice knows when to teach and when to cheer, and knowing which channel to tune into is a skill in itself that dictates how well we perform under pressure. Finally, encompassing all these functions is the role of the inner voice in metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking. This is the highest level of executive function. The voice acts as a monitor, constantly evaluating the quality of your own thoughts and memories. When you read a paragraph and a voice inside says, "I didn't understand that, I need to read it again," that is metacognition in action. It is a loop of self-reflection where the mind examines its own contents. This self-monitoring is what allows for intellectual humility and learning. It is the voice that recognizes a gap in knowledge or a flaw in logic.
Without this introspective narrator, we would move through the world on autopilot, unable to correct our mental errors or assess our own level of understanding. It is the light that the mind shines upon itself, allowing us to not just exist, but to know that we exist and to refine the very process of our existence. When scientists peer into the brain to observe the origins of your inner voice, they find that the experience of talking to yourself is biologically surprisingly similar to talking to a room full of people. It turns out that your inner speech is largely generated by the exact same part of the brain responsible for spoken language, a region known as Broca's area, located in the left frontal lobe for most people. When you decide to say a sentence silently in your mind, Broca's area activates and begins to plan the movements of your jaw, lips, and tongue, just as if you were going to articulate the words out loud. The neural patterns are nearly identical, organizing the syntax and the grammar of your private thoughts. This suggests that internally, your brain does not distinguish much between a thought you keep to yourself and a thought you share with the world. To your neurons, the intention is the same and the preparation is just as rigorous. It's a beautiful demonstration of how physical our mental worlds truly are, proving that your silent voice is not just a ghostly echo, but a motor action that simply stopped short of making a sound. This leads us to the fascinating mechanism that keeps your inner voice silent, a biological safeguard that prevents you from constantly murmuring every fleeting thought you have. While your Broca's area is busy preparing the speech, the brain simultaneously sends a powerful inhibitory signal to the motor cortex, specifically the strip of tissue that controls the muscles of your mouth and larynx. This process is essentially a neurological mute button. The brain simulates the act of speaking so perfectly that it has to actively block the signals from reaching your vocal cords. In sleep studies and during deep states of relaxation, this inhibition can sometimes waver, which explains why people might mumble in their sleep. It's a delicate balance of excitation and inhibition, where your brain is constantly shouting on the inside while gently holding a finger to its lips on the outside, allowing you to experience the sensation of a voice without breaking the silence of the room you are resting in. Even with this inhibition in place, the silence of your inner voice is not as absolute as it feels, because your body often plays along with the mind's conversation in microscopic ways. In a phenomenon known as subvocalization, when you recite a verse or think a sentence clearly, your vocal cords often engage in tiny, undetectable movements that mirror the words you are thinking. Electromyography, which measures electrical activity in muscles, has shown that during intense inner speech, the larynx receives faint signals and tenses up in the pattern of the words, even though no air is pushed through to create sound. This means that reading silently is physically tiring in a very subtle way, as your throat is performing a phantom dance of the text you are absorbing as you drift off to sleep. This complexity of this internal communication deepens when we consider how you know that the voice in your head belongs to you and not someone else. This is governed by a sophisticated prediction system called the efference copy, or corollary discharge. When your brain generates a thought, it sends a command to produce the words, but it also sends a carbon copy of that command to the sensory regions of the brain, effectively saying, "Expect to hear this specific voice now." Because the brain predicts the sound, it dampens the sensory impact, marking the voice as self-generated. This is the same reason you can't tickle yourself. Your brain predicts the sensation and cancels out the surprise. When this system works perfectly, your inner voice feels familiar and safe, a cozy narrator of your own existence. It's a seamless loop of prediction and confirmation that creates the solid feeling of I that anchors you in the world. While Broca's area handles the speaking part of your internal dialogue, the listening part is handled by Wernicke's area, the region of the brain responsible for understanding language. This confirms that talking to yourself is neurologically a true conversation. One part of your brain speaks and another part listens and interprets. When you are deep in thought, information shuttles back and forth between these two regions, creating a closed loop of communication. This activation explains why you can hear your own thoughts with such clarity, understanding the nuance and tone just as you would if a friend were speaking to you. It's a self-contained circuit of meaning, allowing you to be both the storyteller and the captivated audience simultaneously, a process that becomes particularly soothing when you use your inner voice to calm yourself down after a long day.
Connecting these two vital language centers, the speaker and the listener, is a massive bundle of nerve fibers called the arcuate fasciculus. You can visualize this as a superhighway of white matter that curves through the brain, allowing high-speed transmission of data between the frontal and temporal lobes. The integrity of this neural bridge is essential for a fluid inner monologue. In people who are expert thinkers or those who rely heavily on verbal strategies to solve problems, this pathway is often highly developed. It is the physical infrastructure of your consciousness, a literal bridge that allows the spark of an idea in the front of your brain to be understood as a coherent sentence in the back of your brain. As you relax tonight, you can imagine these neural highways humming quietly, carrying the gentle traffic of your final thoughts of the day before the lights go out. Beyond the language centers, the auditory cortex, usually reserved for processing sounds from the outside world, also lights up during inner speech. This finding was a breakthrough for neuroscientists because it validated the subjective experience that we really do hear our thoughts. When you imagine a specific sound, like a crashing wave or a loved one's voice, the primary auditory cortex activates almost as strongly as if the sound were real. This implies that imagination is not a separate, weaker faculty, but rather a simulation that hijacks the sensory hardware of the brain. Your brain constructs a virtual reality of sound, playing back memories and words on the same equipment used for hearing the world, which is why a comforting memory can feel so vivid and present when you are lying in the quiet dark. However, the inner voice is not always just about words and definitions. It is often rich with emotion, sarcasm, and tone, which brings the right hemisphere of the brain into the picture. While the left hemisphere typically handles the grammar and vocabulary, the right hemisphere provides the prosody, the musicality and emotional weight of the voice. If your inner voice is critiquing you harshly or soothing you gently, the right hemisphere is applying that emotional filter. It adds the color to the black and white text of your thoughts. This collaboration between the logical left and the emotional right ensures that your internal monologue has a personality, reflecting your current mood and feelings, making the voice inside your head feel uniquely and intimately like you. There is also a significant difference in brain activity depending on whether your inner speech is condensed or expanded. Expanding on the work of psychologist Lev Vygotsky, neuroscientists have found that when we are relaxed or thinking about familiar topics, our inner speech becomes condensed, abbreviated, telegraphic, and lightning fast, stripping away the grammar because the brain already knows the context. In this state, the brain's activity is efficient and streamlined. However, when we face a difficult problem or a stressful situation, we switch to expanded inner speech, using full, grammatically correct sentences to slow down our thinking and regulate our behavior. This shift is visible in the brain's energy consumption. The harder the task, the more your inner voice articulates every single syllable to help you navigate the challenge, acting as a cognitive anchor. Finally, we must look at the default mode network, a large-scale brain network that becomes active when you stop focusing on the outside world and turn your attention inward, such as when you are daydreaming or drifting off to sleep. The inner voice is the primary narrator of this network. When the default mode network comes online, your brain begins to wander through memories, future plans, and hypothetical scenarios, all guided by that internal stream of consciousness. It's the brain's screensaver, but it is far from inactive. It is a rich, associative state where creativity often blossoms. As you lie in bed now, your brain is likely shifting into this default mode, and your inner voice is slowly untethering from the logic of the day, becoming more fluid and dreamlike as it prepares to hand over the reins to sleep.
One of the most fascinating characteristics of the inside of your mind is its remarkable speed and tendency towards abbreviation, a phenomenon psychologists refer to as condensed inner speech. Because the speaker and the listener are the same person, you, there is no need to articulate full, grammatically correct sentences to convey a message to yourself, as you already know the context of your own thoughts. Research into the linguistics of inner speech reveals that it is often fragmented, stripped of the subject, and consisting only of the predicate or the verb, allowing it to move much faster than overt speech ever could. For example, if you see a bus approaching, you do not say to yourself, "The bus is coming down the street now," but rather your mind simply flashes the concept, "coming" or "bus," and the full meaning is instantaneously understood. This syntactical condensation means that inner speech is estimated to operate at a rate of 4,000 words per minute, nearly 10 times faster than verbal speech. It is this incredible velocity that allows you to plan complex actions, assess environments, and make decisions in split seconds, creating a stream of consciousness that feels seamless and immediate, distinct from the slower, clunky nature of talking out loud. This internal condensation expands and contracts depending on the difficulty of the task you are facing, shifting into what researchers call expanded inner speech when you encounter obstacles. While your thoughts might be a rapid shorthand blur during routine activities like brushing your teeth or walking a familiar route, the moment you are challenged, perhaps by a difficult math problem, a complex recipe, or a stressful social situation, your inner voice slows down and becomes fully grammatical. Studies using electromyography to track micro-movements in the throat muscles show that during these high-load cognitive tasks, the inner voice begins to mimic the structure of external speech almost perfectly. This shift occurs because using full sentences helps to structure the problem, holding the details in your working memory and allowing you to manipulate the information more logically. It is as if your mind intuitively knows that to solve a puzzle, it must step out of the abstract and into the concrete, talking you through the steps just as a teacher would guide a student, proving that the form of your inner voice is not static, but a dynamic tool that adapts to your cognitive needs.
Beyond just varying in speed and structure, the voice inside your head is often dialogic rather than monologic, meaning it frequently splits into multiple positions to debate, argue, or converse with itself. This concept, known as the dialogical self theory, suggests that the mind functions less like a single computer processor and more like a society of mind, where different internal characters hold different viewpoints. You might experience this when making a difficult decision, where one internal voice advocates for indulgence while another advocates for discipline, creating a genuine back-and-forth conversation that feels like two distinct entities interacting. Neuroimaging studies support this, showing that when we engage in this kind of internal debate, the brain activates regions associated with theory of mind, the same areas used to understand the perspectives of other people. This implies that when you talk to yourself, you are essentially simulating a social interaction, temporarily role-playing different aspects of your personality to reach a consensus, which explains why the voice can sometimes feel like a supportive friend and other times like a harsh critic, yet both originate from the same neural source. There is a specific and powerful variation of this internal dialogue known as distanced self-talk, which involves speaking to yourself in the third person, using your own name or pronouns like he or she instead of I. Research conducted at the University of Michigan has found that this simple linguistic shift can have profound effects on emotional regulation and self-control. When people use the first person, I, they tend to be immersed in their emotions, feeling the full weight of anxiety or stress. But when they switch to using their own name, thinking, for example, David needs to calm down instead of I need to calm down, it creates a psychological distance. This phenomenon, often termed Solomon's paradox, allows you to view your own problems with the wisdom and objectivity you would usually reserve for a friend. This form of internal voice reduces activity in the brain's emotional centers, such as the amygdala, while engaging the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for logic and planning.
It is a subtle but distinct variation in how the voice manifests, turning a subjective experience into an objective observation, acting as a built-in mechanism for cooling down an overheated mind. Sometimes the voice inside your mind transforms into something that isn't speech at all, but rather a phenomenon known as involuntary musical imagery, more commonly referred to as an earworm. This is a unique form of internal audio where a snippet of music loops repeatedly without your conscious permission, yet it occupies the same phonological loop in your working memory that your inner voice uses for language. Scientists have found that this musical voice often emerges during times of low cognitive load, such as when you are trying to sleep or doing chores, because the brain has idle processing power that it seeks to fill. Interestingly, the tempo of these internal songs is often highly accurate to the original recording, demonstrating the mind's incredible capacity for auditory fidelity even without external sound. For many people, this musical variation of the inner voice serves a soothing function, a way for the brain to regulate its arousal levels, though it can become intrusive. It highlights that the voice in your head is not strictly verbal. It is a sonic simulator capable of reproducing melodies, timbres, and rhythms just as easily as it reproduces words. Speaking of the different ways we hear things in our minds, I'd love to know about your experience as we settle in tonight. When you are deeply relaxed or reading quietly, does your inner voice sound exactly like you do when you speak out loud, or does it take on a different, perhaps calmer or wiser tone? It is fascinating how unique this experience is for everyone. Moving deeper into the variations of internal experience, we encounter the phenomenon of the inner critic, a specific form of repetitive negative thinking that often runs on a separate track from your conscious, intentional thoughts. This voice is often repetitive, looping the same worries or judgments, and is strongly linked to the activation of the default mode network in the brain, the system that comes online when we are not focused on a specific task. Unlike the helpful instructional voice that guides you through a recipe, the inner critic often feels intrusive and harder to control, sometimes mimicking the tone of an authority figure from your past, such as a parent or a teacher. Psychologists distinguish this from standard inner speech by noting its ego-dystonic nature in some cases, meaning it feels inconsistent with your true self-image. However, it's actually a protective mechanism gone awry. Biologically, this voice evolved to alert early humans to social threats or mistakes that could lead to ostracization. In the modern world, this survival tool simply becomes overactive, mistaking social awkwardness for life-threatening danger, resulting in a nagging internal narration that tries to keep you safe by keeping you small. As you drift closer to the edges of sleep, the voice inside your mind undergoes a radical transformation into what is known as hypnagogic cognition. In the transition state between wakefulness and sleep, the logical, structured inner voice begins to dissolve, replaced by random, often nonsensical phrases, names, or sentences that seem to appear out of nowhere. Unlike the purposeful daytime thoughts that you direct, these hypnagogic voices are passive. You are the audience rather than the speaker. You might hear a voice clearly say a word like clouds or a sentence that makes no grammatical sense, accompanied by fleeting visual images. This occurs because the brain's frontal lobes, which are responsible for logic and reality testing, are powering down, while the sensory association areas remain active, firing random signals. It's a distinct form of internal experience that signals the brain is going offline for the night, loosening the tight grip of the ego and allowing the subconscious to bubble up in a fluid, dreamlike stream of auditory hallucinations that are perfectly normal and a sign of deep relaxation. For those who are avid readers, the inner voice takes on a chameleon-like quality known as the reader's voice or auditory simulation during reading. When you read a novel, your mind doesn't just process the text as abstract information. For many, it actively assigns specific voices, accents, and timbres to different characters. A study investigating this phenomenon found that over 80% of readers hear an inner voice while reading, and this voice often shifts its pitch and pace based on the dialogue tags and descriptions in the text. If a character whispers, the inner voice lowers its volume. This suggests that the brain processes written language by reconstructing it into a simulated auditory experience, using the same neural pathways involved in hearing actual speech. This internal acting performance happens instantaneously and effortlessly, allowing you to hear a British accent, a gritty villain, or a high-pitched child without a single sound being made in the room. This ability demonstrates the immense creative flexibility of the inner voice, serving not just as a narrator of your own life, but as a simulator of entire worlds and personalities.
Another variation in the form of inner speech is found in the phenomenon of silent rehearsal, a specific mode of thought used to prepare for future vocalization. Unlike the condensed, abstract thoughts you have for yourself, rehearsal speech is fully formed, articulated at a normal conversational pace, and often repeated multiple times to perfect the phrasing. This is the voice you hear when you are preparing to make a phone call, practicing an apology, or memorizing a presentation. Neurologically, this form of inner speech triggers strong subvocalization, sending signals to the tongue and larynx that are almost strong enough to create movement, but are inhibited at the last moment. This rehearsal mode acts as a sandbox environment for the brain, allowing you to test out words, hear how they sound, and edit them for impact before they are released into the real world. It is a distinct functional state of the inner voice, shifting from a tool of thinking to a tool of performance, highlighting the mind's ability to simulate future reality with incredible precision. For individuals who speak more than one language, the inner voice offers a complex and layered experience known as bilingual internal speech. Research into bilingualism reveals that the language of the inner voice often shifts depending on the emotional context or the specific domain of life being thought about. A person might count or do arithmetic in their first language, which is deeply ingrained in their early memory, but switch to their second language when thinking about professional work or abstract concepts learned later in life. Furthermore, studies suggest that switching languages internally can change the emotional resonance of the thoughts. Thinking about a painful memory in a second language often feels less intense and more analytical than thinking about it in one's native tongue. This emotional detachment effect allows bilingual individuals to use their internal voice as a tool for emotional regulation, unconsciously code switching to manage how they feel. This variation proves that the inner voice is culturally bound and deeply tied to the specific neural networks formed during language acquisition, making the internal monologue a fluid, shifting landscape of sounds and meanings. Many psychologists now view the inner voice inside your head not as a single monolithic speaker, but rather as a dynamic society of mind, a concept known as the dialogical self-theory. Developed by Hutch psychologist Hubert Hermans, this framework suggests that the self is not a centralized unity, but a decentralized multiplicity of different I positions. At any given moment, you might have an internal position functioning as I the parent, which speaks with a tone of responsibility and care, while simultaneously holding a position of I the child, which might voice feelings of vulnerability or playfulness. These positions engage in a dialogue with one another, much like characters in a novel or actors on a stage, negotiating your decisions and feelings through internal conversation. This means that the voice you hear is essentially a form of role-playing, where you are the writer, the director, and all the actors combined. When you feel conflicted, it is often because two valid I positions, perhaps the ambitious professional and the relaxation-seeking private self, are having a heated debate in the auditory theater of your mind. And mental well-being often depends on the ability of these internal voices to listen to one another rather than shouting each other down. This internal negotiation becomes even more fascinating when we look at the specific words we use to address ourselves, particularly the psychological distance created by switching pronouns.
Research led by psychologist Ethan Kross has demonstrated that the simple act of talking to yourself in the third person, using your own name or you instead of I, can significantly reduce anxiety and improve emotional regulation. This phenomenon, often referred to as distanced self-talk, works by shifting your perspective from a subjective, immersed experience to a more objective, observer-like standpoint. When you say, "I am really nervous," your brain activates regions associated with the immediate emotional experience of fear. However, if you say, "You are nervous, but you can handle this," using your name, the brain activity shifts. It mimics the psychological state of giving advice to a friend. This linguistic shift allows you to bypass the brain's egocentric panic response, granting you access to clearer, more rational thinking. It's a subtle biohack of the mind, proving that the grammatical structure of your inner voice is just as important as the message it conveys. Have you ever noticed yourself naturally switching to addressing yourself as you or your name during a particularly difficult or stressful moment? When the inner voice fails to regulate emotion and instead gets trapped in a loop, it enters a state known to psychologists as rumination, a key feature of the mind's default mode network gone awry. Rumination is essentially a broken record of internal speech where the voice repeatedly replays past distress or future worries without moving towards a solution. Unlike constructive reflection, which moves a narrative forward, ruminative self-talk is circular and static. Neuroimaging studies suggest that this happens when the brain's cognitive control networks fail to inhibit the emotional centers, allowing the inner voice to be hijacked by the amygdala. The voice asks why questions, like "Why is this happening to me?" which are often unanswerable and lead to abstract negative philosophizing, rather than how questions, which tend to be concrete and action-oriented. This repetitive internal speech is not just a symptom of bad moods, but often the mechanism that sustains them, as the voice re-encodes the negative memory every time it speaks it, deepening the neural groove and making the thought easier to access the next time, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of internal sound.
The origin of the specific tone and texture of this inner voice often traces back to the external voices of our earliest caregivers, a process described in psychology as the internalization of attachment figures. Lev Vygotsky originally proposed that inner speech is social speech turned inward, but modern attachment theory takes this further, suggesting that the inner critic or inner nurturer we hear as adults often mimics the actual acoustic properties, the prosody, rhythm, and timbre of our parents or guardians. If a child grew up with a parent who was soothing and patient during times of stress, their adult inner voice is statistically more likely to adopt a compassionate tone during failure. Conversely, harsh or erratic parenting can install a permanent internal interlocutor that speaks with impatience or disdain. This means that for many people, the voice in their head is a kind of auditory ghost, a lingering echo of authority figures from decades ago that has been integrated so seamlessly into the psyche that it is mistaken for the self's own original opinion, blurring the line between who we are and who we were told to be. This evolutionary layering of the mind also explains why the inner voice often leans toward negativity, a phenomenon deeply rooted in our survival instincts. Humans possess a negativity bias, meaning the brain prioritizes negative information over positive data, because in our ancestral environment, ignoring a threat was fatal, while ignoring a reward was merely inconvenient. Your inner voice acts as a constantly running risk assessment machine designed to scan for social threats, rejection, or failure. It is essentially a smoke detector that is calibrated to be overly sensitive. It would rather wake you up at 3 a.m. with a false alarm about an awkward conversation from 5 years ago than risk you missing a potential social cue that could lead to ostracization. This critical narrator isn't necessarily trying to make you unhappy. It is trying to keep you safe in the way it knows best, by hyper-analyzing everything that could possibly go wrong.
Understanding that this negative tilt is a biological default rather than a character flaw can change your relationship with your own mind. Do you find that your inner narrator tends to act more like a harsh critic, pointing out dangers, or a supportive coach, encouraging you to rest? The relationship between our identity and our inner voice takes on a mystical quality when we engage with fiction through a phenomenon known as the phenomenology of reading. When you read a novel, you are essentially inviting a stranger's consciousness to cohabit your mind, and for many readers, this results in hearing the characters' voices as distinct from their own inner monologue. This is not a hallucination, but a vivid form of auditory imagery where the brain simulates the accent, pitch, and cadence of a character based on textual clues. Functional MRI scans show that when people read expressive dialogue, the areas of the brain involved in processing real human voices light up. This temporary merger of your inner voice with a fictional one allows for a deep form of empathy. You are literally running the software of another person's psyche on your own hardware. For the duration of the book, your internal monologue is partially suspended or overwritten by the narrative voice, allowing you to be someone else, which is why finishing a good book can sometimes result in a feeling of quiet grief as the guest voice departs and your own solitary monologue resumes. In rare and complex cases, the mechanism that distinguishes our own inner voice from external sounds malfunctions, shedding light on the neurological roots of auditory hallucinations. This distinction relies on a neural signal called corollary discharge. When you're about to speak, or even when you're about to think a sentence in your inner voice, your brain's motor cortex sends a copy of that command to the sensory cortex, effectively saying, "Ignore this sound, I am the one producing it." This dampens the sensory impact of your own voice, which is why you cannot tickle yourself. Your brain predicts the sensation. In conditions like schizophrenia, this corollary discharge signal may be weak or missing. The person generates an internal thought, but the sensory cortex does not receive the memo that the thought is self-generated. Consequently, the thought is perceived with the full sensory force and alien quality of an external voice. It is a profound error in source monitoring, proving that the feeling of ownership over our inner voice is a fragile neurological construct, not a guaranteed feature of consciousness. When reading a novel or a story, does the voice in your head ever change its accent, gender, or tone to match the different characters you are imagining? On a more practical level, the specific content of our inner speech plays a measurable role in physical performance and motor skills, dividing broadly into instructional versus motivational self-talk. Research in sports psychology reveals that these two types of internal voices activate different neural pathways and are useful for different tasks. Instructional self-talk, such as telling yourself, "keep your elbow in" or "focus on the ball," engages the brain's planning and executive control centers. It's highly effective for tasks requiring fine motor skills, precision, and technique. In contrast, motivational self-talk, like shouting internally, "you can do this," or "power through," is less about precision and more about mobilizing physiological effort and endurance. It works by increasing arousal levels and suppressing the signals of fatigue. Elite athletes often have highly curated scripts of inner speech, knowing exactly when to switch from the technical voice of the engineer to the primal voice of the cheerleader to extract maximum performance from their bodies. The volume and intensity of the voice inside your mind are also heavily influenced by your external environment, specifically the level of social isolation you experience. When humans are placed in environments of extreme solitude, such as solitary confinement or solo polar expeditions, the inner voice often changes character. Without external conversation to anchor the mind, the brain seeks to maintain its linguistic processing capabilities by turning up the volume on internal dialogue. In these states of sensory deprivation, the inner voice can become a distinct other that provides companionship. This is sometimes called the third man factor in survival situations, where the internal monitor splits off to become a calming, authoritative presence that guides the person to safety. It suggests that the inner voice serves a homeostatic function. It regulates our need for social contact, filling the silence with generated conversation when the world around us goes quiet, ensuring that the mind always has someone to talk to, even if it is just itself. Does your inner monologue tend to get louder and more active when you are completely alone, or do you find that silence quiets the mind?
Ultimately, the inner voice inside your mind is the primary tool for constructing your narrative identity, the internalized and evolving story of the self. According to psychologist Dan McAdams, we do not just have memories, we actively curate and edit them through our inner speech to create a cohesive plot that explains who we are. Your inner voice is the narrator of this autobiography. It constantly retrieves past events and rewrites them in the present tense of your mind, deciding which details to highlight and which to ignore to fit the current theme of your life. If you view yourself as a survivor, your inner voice will narrate your past struggles as overcoming obstacles. If you view yourself as a victim, it will narrate the same events as tragedies. This means that your identity is not a fixed object found deep inside the brain, but a story that is being told sentence by sentence by the voice in your head. You are, in a very real sense, the story that you keep telling yourself, and by changing the tone and content of that voice, you can effectively rewrite the character of the self. To ensure you don't miss the next chapter of these relaxing insights, please subscribe to the channel. One of the most profound and unsettling ways the inner voice can behave occurs when the brain fails to recognize ownership of its own internal speech, a phenomenon centrally linked to auditory verbal hallucinations. While we typically think of hearing voices as a distinct malfunction, neuroscientific research suggests it is actually a subtle slip in the brain's source monitoring system. When you speak silently to yourself, your brain sends a specific signal known as a corollary discharge or an efference copy to the auditory cortex. This signal essentially whispers, "Don't worry. This sound is coming from me, not the outside world," which dampens the sensory impact of the voice. In the minds of those who experience auditory hallucinations, this critical "it's me" signal fails to fire. The inner speech occurs, but the auditory cortex processes it with the full intensity and surprise of an external sound. The content is self-generated, but the sensation is undeniably alien. This creates a reality where the voice inside the mind feels entirely autonomous, capable of interrupting, arguing, or commenting from a perceived distance, revealing just how fragile the boundary is between our internal thoughts and the external world. The nature and personality of these misidentified inner voices are not random, but are surprisingly shaped by the culture in which a listener lives, proving that our social environment constructs our internal reality. A landmark study by Stanford anthropologist Tanya Luhrmann compared the auditory hallucinations of people in the United States with those in India and Ghana. She found a startling difference. While Americans largely reported their voices as violent, harsh, and diagnostic, using clinical terms or commanding destruction, listeners in India and Ghana often reported entirely different experiences. Their voices were frequently described as playful, advice-giving, or resembling the voices of ancestors and older relatives. In Accra, for instance, many described the voices as a positive connection to the divine or a guide to getting things done. This suggests that the biological spark of the voice, the misfiring neurons, might be universal,
but the character of the voice inside the mind is dressed in the clothing of our cultural expectations. If a culture views the mind as a fortress under siege, the voices are invaders. If the mind is viewed as a permeable vessel for spirits or community, the voices become visitors, changing the entire emotional texture of the experience. When the inner voice turns towards depression, it undergoes a transformation in its temporal focus, getting stuck in a phenomenon psychologists call depressive rumination. Unlike healthy reflection, which moves forward towards a solution, rumination is a broken record, a static loop where the inner voice asks circular questions like, "Why do I feel this way?" or "What is wrong with me?" without ever pausing for an answer. Neuroimaging studies have linked this repetitive inner speech to hyperactivity in the default mode network, a set of brain regions that activates when we are not focused on a task. In a healthy mind, this network quiets down when we engage with the world, but in a depressed mind, the default mode network stays fiercely lit, trapping the inner voice in a hyper-connected cycle of past regrets and negative self-judgment. The voice essentially acts as a prosecuting attorney with no defense counsel present, selectively retrieving memories that confirm a negative bias. This relentless verbal loop crowds out other thoughts, shrinking the cognitive space available for problem-solving or experiencing the sensory present, effectively locking the listener in a prison built of words.
In contrast to the backward-looking gaze of depression, the inner voice of anxiety is almost entirely obsessed with the future, utilizing a mental faculty known as episodic simulation to construct catastrophic narratives. The anxious inner voice is a storyteller of the worst-case scenario, characterized by a rapid-fire grammar of conditionals, sentences starting with what if, suppose, or if only. While simulating the future is a normal function of the human mind designed for planning, anxiety hijacks this verbal machinery. It creates a worry chain, where one verbal thought triggers an associated negative thought, which triggers another, accelerating the pace of internal speech until it feels like a runaway train. Interestingly, research suggests that this verbal worry actually serves as a form of cognitive avoidance. By fixating on the verbal details of a potential problem, the inner voice suppresses the raw physiological emotions and mental images that might be even more distressing. In this way, the racing inner voice acts as a buffer, talking loudly and quickly to drown out the deeper, wordless feelings of fear that the body is trying to process. A different and deeply distressing manifestation of the inner voice is found in obsessive-compulsive disorder, where the mind produces what are known as ego-dystonic intrusive thoughts. These are verbal snippets or phrases that are fundamentally opposed to the person's true character, values, and desires. A loving parent might hear a sudden internal whisper about harming their child, or a deeply religious person might hear a blasphemous phrase. The crucial distinction here is that the inner voice is not hallucinated. The person knows it is a thought, but it feels like a foreign invasion. The suffering comes from a cognitive glitch called thought-action fusion, where the brain mistakenly believes that thinking a sentence is morally equivalent to saying it aloud or performing the action. The inner voice becomes a source of immense guilt, causing the person to engage in ritualistic behaviors to cancel out the rogue words. This reveals that we often treat our inner voice with too much authority. Just because the mind speaks a sentence does not mean the sentence is true, nor does it reflect the intent of the thinker. For those struggling with eating disorders, the inner voice often splits into a duality, evolving into a distinct externalized persona that functions like an abusive coach or a dictator. Patients frequently describe this anorexic voice as separate from their own identity, a cold and logical narrator that provides a running commentary on food, body size, and self-worth. It is highly directive, issuing commands rather than suggestions, and often promises safety or superiority in exchange for obedience.
Functional MRI scans have actually shown that when patients engage with this specific critical voice, different parts of the brain are activated compared to when they're engaging in normal self-reflection. The brain processes this voice almost as if it were interacting with another person. This internal entity thrives on isolation. The more the person listens to the voice's commands to withdraw from social eating or friends, the louder and more dominant the voice becomes, filling the silence where social connection used to be. It is a profound example of how the inner monologue can become parasitic, turning the tool of language against the body that houses it. Deep trauma can shatter the continuity of the inner voice, stripping it of its ability to act as a storyteller for our lives. Under normal circumstances, our inner narrator organizes our experiences into a linear timeline, a beginning, a middle, and an end, which places memories firmly in the past. However, during the flashbacks associated with post-traumatic stress disorder, this narrative function collapses. Brain scans of people reliving a traumatic event show a significant shutdown in Broca's area, the language center responsible for generating speech, both internal and external. This leads to a state known as speechless terror. Because the inner voice goes silent or becomes fragmented, the brain cannot verbally tag the memory as something that happened back then. Instead, the memory is experienced as raw sensation and image happening right now. The healing process often involves slowly reactivating the inner voice, helping the survivor find the words to describe the event, thereby handing the memory back to the narrator who can finally file it away in the archives of the past. At the other end of the spectrum is the inner voice during episodes of mania, often seen in bipolar disorder, where the internal monologue accelerates into what clinicians call a flight of ideas. The speed of internal speech becomes so rapid that the mouth physically cannot keep up, leading to pressured speech, but the internal experience is even chaotic. The connections between thoughts stop being logical and become driven by sound, a phenomenon called clang associations. The inner voice might jump from blue to shoe to flew away, surfing on the phonetics of words rather than their meaning. It creates a cacophony in the mind's ear, a sensation of multiple television channels changing rapidly. It represents an overflow of the phonological loop, the component of working memory that handles inner speech. The filter that usually slows down our thoughts to a speakable pace dissolves, leaving the listener washed over by a torrent of uninhibited high-velocity language that feels brilliant and exhausting all at once.
In the realm of dissociation and complex identity structures, the inner voice challenges the very assumption that we have a single, unified self. For individuals with dissociative identity disorder, the headspace is not occupied by a solo narrator, but can feel like a meeting room with multiple distinct participants. These alters, or parts, often have their own unique internal voices, complete with different vocabularies, tones, ages, and even accents. Unlike hallucinations, these voices are often recognized as coming from inside, but they are experienced as having independent agency. One voice might handle daily logistics, while another holds emotional pain, and they can converse with one another internally. This phenomenon suggests that the I we identify with is a construct of memory and consciousness binding. When that binding loosens, the inner speech functions decouple, revealing that the human mind is capable of sustaining multiple streams of consciousness simultaneously, each with its own private monologue running in parallel. Ultimately, the most effective way to manage a difficult inner voice, whether in therapy or daily life, is often not to silence it, but to change our relationship with it. Approaches like acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, focus on a technique called cognitive diffusion. This involves stepping back and observing the inner voice as a separate process, a radio playing in the background, rather than the absolute truth. Instead of thinking, "I am a failure," the technique encourages the listener to think, "I am noticing that I am having the thought that I am a failure." This slight linguistic shift creates a buffer zone. It teaches the brain that the voice is just a biological event, a stream of symbols and sounds, rather than a command that must be obeyed.
By visualizing the words of the inner voice as leaves floating down a stream or clouds passing in the sky, we reduce the emotional impact of the chatter. We learn that we are not the voice itself. We are the silent, spacious awareness that hears the voice, a distinction that offers a profound sense of peace and mental freedom. One of the most fascinating discoveries about controlling this internal dialogue involves a psychological phenomenon known as illeism, which is the act of referring to yourself in the third person. While talking to yourself using your own name might seem like the behavior of an eccentric character in a novel, research from the University of Michigan suggests it is actually a profound cognitive hack for emotional regulation. When you engage in your usual inner monologue using I, such as thinking, "Why am I so worried?" you activate the brain's self-referential processing centers, which can trap you in a subjective emotional loop. However, simply shifting the pronoun and asking, "Why is David so worried?" creates a psychological concept called self-distancing. This slight linguistic shift forces your brain to switch perspective, viewing your problems as if they belonged to a friend rather than yourself. Studies show that this small change in your internal voice significantly reduces activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center, and allows you to give yourself wiser, more objective advice, effectively bypassing the panic that often clouds the first-person perspective. Building on this concept of perspective, your inner voice also possesses the unique ability to engage in temporal distancing, a mental form of time travel that can immediately quiet immediate anxiety. This involves projecting your inner narrator into the future to look back at the present moment, asking yourself, "How will I feel about this specific worry in 1 year or even 10 years?" When you do this, you are not just using your imagination, you are engaging the prefrontal cortex to override the immediate high-alert signals of the limbic system. Psychologists have found that this specific type of inner dialogue reduces the intensity of current stressors by contextualizing them as temporary and finite. By changing the tense of your inner speech from the urgent present to the reflective future, you alter the biological reaction in your body, lowering blood pressure and heart rate, turning a screaming inner crisis into a manageable, fleeting memory before it has even passed. Beyond shifting time and perspective, the specific emotional vocabulary your inner voice uses can physically restructure your body's response to stress through a process called anxiety reappraisal. Many people try to use their inner voice to calm down by thinking, "I am calm," but physiologically, anxiety is a state of high arousal and calmness is a state of low arousal. The biochemical gap between them is often too wide for the mind to bridge instantly. Instead, research suggests using your inner voice to label the feeling as excitement. Since anxiety and excitement are almost identical in terms of heart rate and cortisol levels, differing only in whether the mind perceives the situation as a threat or an opportunity, telling yourself, "I am excited," aligns with your body's current energy level but flips the emotional context. This technique, often used by public speakers and athletes, harnesses the power of the inner voice to steer the body's existing energy rather than fighting against it, turning nervous trembling into focused readiness. This intricate control over the inner voice extends to how we process the written word, specifically through the phenomenon of subvocalization during reading. While we often think of the inner voice as a barrier to speed reading, forcing us to say every word in our heads at a conversational pace, it is actually a critical tool for deep comprehension and empathy. When you read a novel and hear the characters speaking, your brain is simulating the social interactions as if they were real, engaging the same neural networks used to navigate actual human relationships. Attempting to completely silence this subvocalization to read faster often results in a loss of nuance and emotional connection to the text. Advanced readers actually learn to modulate this inner volume, turning the volume down to skim informational text where only data is needed, and turning the volume up for poetry or fiction, allowing the inner voice to perform the text, adding rhythm, tone, and emotional weight that the eyes alone cannot perceive.
Deepening our understanding of how to quiet the mind brings us to the default mode network, the series of interacting brain regions that are most active when we are doing nothing but thinking about ourselves.
This network is the biological home of the wandering mind and the chatter that keeps you awake at night. Fascinating neuroimaging studies of long-term meditators reveal that consistent practice does not just relax the mind, but physically alters the functional connectivity of this network. For an experienced meditator, the resting state of the brain is different. The connection between the selfing centers of the brain and the bodily sensation centers changes, allowing them to view the inner voice as a passing cloud rather than a storm they are stuck inside. This suggests that a quiet mind is not an accident of genetics, but a trainable skill, where the volume knob of the inner dialogue can be manually adjusted through the architecture of the brain itself. I'm curious, when you try to sit in total silence, do you find that your inner voice gets louder at first, or does it naturally settle down? Feel free to share your experience in the comments. Another powerful mechanism for harnessing this voice is a technique psychiatrists call affect labeling, which can best be summarized by the phrase, "name it to tame it." When you experience a strong, undefined emotion, your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, is highly active. However, the moment you use your inner voice to attach a specific word to that feeling, saying to yourself, "this is anger," or "this is disappointment," activity in the amygdala significantly decreases. This happens because the act of labeling requires the engagement of the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain involved in inhibiting behavior and processing language. By forcing the brain to convert raw emotional data into linguistic code, words, you are physically shifting neural energy from the emotional centers to the logical centers. The inner voice acts as a bridge, carrying the chaotic energy of emotion over to the orderly realm of language, effectively neutralizing the intensity of the feeling simply by acknowledging it. Conversely, attempting to forcefully silence the inner voice often leads to the white bear problem, a psychological irony named after a famous experiment where participants were told not to think of a white bear. Studies in thought suppression reveal that when you command your inner voice to stop thinking about a specific topic, part of your brain must, ironically, constantly monitor your thoughts to ensure you aren't thinking about it. This monitoring process keeps the forbidden thought primed and ready, causing it to rebound with even greater frequency the moment your focus wavers. This is why telling yourself, "don't worry," often leads to more worry. The most effective way to harness the voice in these moments is not suppression, but substitution, giving the inner voice a new, neutral task to perform, rather than leaving a vacuum that the brain feels compelled to fill with the very thought you are trying to avoid. One of the most surprising ways to occupy this vacuum and quiet a racing inner monologue is through a method called articulatory suppression. Because the inner voice relies on the phonological loop, the part of working memory that handles verbal information, it has a limited bandwidth. It is physically difficult for the brain to produce an inner monologue while simultaneously managing another verbal task. This is why repeating a mantra, counting backwards, or even the mechanical act of chewing gum can dampen the inner voice. Research has shown that the motor signals sent to the jaw and tongue during chewing can interfere with the subvocalization process, effectively jamming the signal of repetitive thoughts. By occupying the machinery of speech, even without making a sound, you prevent the phonological loop from spinning out on a worry, providing a mechanical break for a runaway mind. The transition from thinking to writing offers another profound way to harness the inner voice, essentially slowing it down to the speed of your hand. Your inner voice can speak at a rate of 4,000 words per minute in bursts of abstract thought, a speed that often leads to looping and catastrophic thinking because ideas crash into one another before they are fully processed. However, handwriting forces the brain to slow down to roughly 30 or 40 words per minute. This massive deceleration forces the inner voice to structure itself, ensuring that a thought must be fully formed, linear, and coherent before it can be externalized. This is why journaling is often prescribed for anxiety. It is not just about venting, but about forcing the inner narrator to switch from a chaotic, rapid-fire broadcast to a slow, deliberate dictation, which naturally organizes the mind and reveals solutions that were hidden in the speed of the mental chatter. Finally, we arrive at the internal application of the Socratic method, a cornerstone of cognitive behavioral therapy that transforms the inner voice from a critic to a scientist. Often, our inner dialogue operates on automatic assumptions, telling us this will be a disaster or they don't like me, as if these were established facts. By training the inner voice to ask evidence-based questions, such as, what evidence do I have for this thought? Or, is there an alternative explanation? We engage the rational brain to dismantle emotional reflexes. This is not about positive thinking or lying to oneself, but about accuracy. Over time, this practice rewires the automatic nature of the inner voice. Instead of automatically accepting a negative premise, the inner dialogue becomes a filter, checking the validity of thoughts before they are allowed to impact our emotional state, effectively turning the voice inside your head into a guardian rather than an adversary.
When we broaden our view to look at the voice inside your mind through a cross-cultural lens, we discover that the very structure of your internal monologue is shaped by the society in which you were raised. Psychologists have found that individuals from Western individualistic cultures tend to experience their inner voice as a solitary, assertive narrator, a protagonist driving the action of their life story. Whereas those from collectivist cultures, particularly in East Asia, often report an inner dialogue that is more polyphonic, populated by the internalized voices of family members, peers, and societal expectations. In these minds, the inner speech is less of a monologue and more of a conference, where the self is negotiated through the imagined perspectives of others. This suggests that the I you hear in your head is not a purely biological inevitability, but a cultural artifact constructed by the social world you inhabit, functioning as a rehearsal space where you practice your role within your specific community, proving that even in the deepest privacy of your own skull, you are never truly alone. This cultural shaping of the inner voice extends so deep that it actually alters the texture of our most intense psychological experiences, even in how we perceive the boundaries of the mind itself. Remarkable anthropological research, led by Stanford professor Tanya Luhrmann, examined how people with schizophrenia experience auditory hallucinations across different cultures, revealing a stunning difference in the personality of the voices they hear. While Americans often described their hearing of voices as violent, hateful, and intrusive, reflecting a culture that prizes privacy and views the mind as a fortress that has been breached, participants in Ghana in India were far more likely to describe their voices as playful or as the comforting advice of ancestors and kin. This indicates that the way you treat your own inner voice, and whether you view it as a helpful guide or a harsh critic, is learned behavior, a script handed down by your culture that determines whether your internal world feels like a sanctuary or a battleground. For those who speak more than one language, the inner voice becomes a tool for emotional regulation, capable of switching tracks to alter the intensity of a thought. This is known as the foreign language effect, a phenomenon where thinking about a difficult decision in your second non-native language actually changes the outcome of your moral reasoning. Because your native language is tied to the deep, raw emotions of childhood and instinct, your inner voice in that language is hot and reactive. However, when you switch your internal monologue to a learned language, the brain processes the words with more distance and logic, bypassing the emotional centers. Studies show that people are more likely to make utilitarian, rational choices when silently narrating the problem in a foreign tongue, effectively using the linguistic shift to turn down the volume on their anxiety and fear, allowing them to think with a coolness that their native inner voice would not permit. But the voice inside the mind does not necessarily need sound to exist, as demonstrated by the fascinating internal experience of the deaf community. For those who are born profound deaf and use sign language as their primary mode of communication, the inner voice is not a phonological loop of imagined sounds, but a visual spatial loop of internal signing. Research using fMRI scans reveals that when a deaf person engages in inner self-talk, their brain activates the same language centers as a hearing person, but also engages the visual cortex, effectively seeing themselves or others signing the thoughts in their mind's eye. This creates a multidimensional internal dialogue where thoughts have shape,
movement, and spatial relationship rather than pitch or tone, proving that the human need to narrate our existence is so powerful that the brain will commandeer whatever sensory system is available, sound or sight, to create a stream of consciousness. History also tells us that the way we use this inner voice has evolved radically over time, specifically in the transition from reading aloud to reading silently. Before the Middle Ages, reading was almost exclusively a communal oral activity. Words were meant to be spoken to be understood, and the idea of silent reading was considered strange and rare. In a famous passage from his Confessions, St. Augustine expresses utter bewilderment when observing St. Ambrose reading in the 4th century, noting with shock that his eyes scanned the page and his heart explored the meaning, but his voice was silent and his tongue was still. As silent reading became the norm over the centuries, it fundamentally rewired the human brain, turning the inner voice from a rehearsal for public speech into a private sanctuary for secret reflection, allowing for the development of complex interiority and the modern sense of a private self that no one else can access. This historical shift towards a private, silent interior world gave rise to what some philosophers call the narrative self, but it is crucial to understand that not everyone possesses a continuous, storytelling inner voice. The philosopher Galen Strawson distinguishes between diachronics, people who feel their self is a continuous character journeying from the past into the future, and episodics, who experience life as series of distinct, intense moments with little connection between the me of yesterday and the me of today. For episodics, the inner voice does not narrate a long, overarching saga. It comments only on the immediate present without the burden of maintaining a consistent storyline. This challenges the assumption that a healthy mind must have a cohesive narrative. For many, the inner voice is not a novelist writing a book, but a series of short, unconnected poems, finding peace in the fragmentation rather than the continuity.
There is a theory that suggests this internal narrator was once perceived not as the self, but as the voice of the gods, a concept known as the bicameral mind hypothesis, proposed by Julian Jaynes. Jaynes argued that early human ancestors, prior to the development of modern consciousness roughly 3,000 years ago, did not experience an inner monologue that they recognized as their own thoughts, but rather experienced auditory hallucinations generated by the right hemisphere of the brain, which were interpreted by the left hemisphere as external commands from deities or rulers. By analyzing ancient texts like the Iliad, Jaynes pointed out that the characters do not introspect or make decisions based on internal debate. Instead, they obey the sudden commands of gods who simply appear and speak. While controversial, the theory highlights how the integration of the inner voice as me is likely a learned cognitive leap, a fragile unification of the brain's two hemispheres that allows us to own our thoughts rather than obey them. In the modern search for understanding this internal commander, we have identified a specific neurological condition known as anendophasia, which refers to individuals who possess no internal monologue whatsoever. Unlike those with a quiet mind who can summon a voice if they choose, people with anendophasia live in a world of pure, unsymbolized thinking, processing complex logic, mathematics, and memories without ever hearing a word in their head. Recent experiments in 2024 have shown that while these individuals perform just as well on logic puzzles, they struggle significantly more with verbal memory tasks, such as remembering a list of rhyming words, because they cannot hear the rhymes in their minds to lock them into memory. This suggests that the inner voice acts as a kind of auditory glue, a scratch pad that holds verbal information in place while we work on it, and without it, the mind must rely on purely abstract associations. For those who do have a persistent inner voice, the content of that voice is heavily influenced by the linguistic grammar of the language they speak, specifically in how that language handles the concept of the future.
Behavioral economists have found that speakers of futureless languages, like Mandarin, where the present and future tenses are the same, such as "it rain tomorrow" rather than "it will rain," tend to have an inner voice that views the future as immediate and pressing, leading to higher savings rates and better health behaviors. In contrast, speakers of languages that grammatically mark the future as distinct and separate from the present often have an inner voice that conceptualizes the future self as a stranger, someone else who can deal with the problems later. This linguistic relativity implies that the grammar you use to talk to yourself subtly sculpts your perception of time, making your inner voice either a procrastinator or a planner, depending on the verb tenses available to you. Ultimately, the goal of many ancient traditions and modern neuroscience alike is to understand the default mode network, the brain system responsible for the ceaseless chatter of the inner voice when we are not focused on a specific task. When this network is overactive, it leads to rumination and anxiety, the monkey mind that jumps from worry to worry. But studies on long-term meditators show that it is possible to permanently alter the function of this network, allowing the inner voice to be switched off at will. This state of chosen silence, where one is fully conscious but thinking no words, reveals that the voice is not the thinker, but merely a tool of the thinker, a distinction that brings us to a place of profound rest. And speaking of rest, as you listen to these facts in the quiet of the night, how would you describe the tone of your own inner voice right now? Is it a fast-paced narrator or a slow, whispering observer? The journey into the mind reveals that silence is not just the absence of noise, but a distinct neurological event, a clearing of the stage. Deep within the philosophy of mind, there is a concept known as the hard problem of consciousness, which asks why the physical firing of neurons in your brain should feel like anything at all, let alone the distinct sensation of hearing a voice. When you listen to your inner monologue, you are experiencing what philosophers call qualia, the subjective, qualitative texture of experience that cannot be fully explained by mapping brain circuits alone. While neuroscientists can point to the Broca's area lighting up or the inhibition of the auditory cortex, they still cannot explain why those electrical signals generate the ghostly private experience of sound where no sound exists. This mystery suggests that the inner voice is not just a mechanical readout of data, but a fundamental aspect of how consciousness manifests itself to itself. Some theories propose that this internal sound is the brain's way of creating a user interface for its own complex machinery, turning raw information processing into a digestible narrative that you, the conscious observer, can understand and interact with, effectively creating the illusion of a conductor leading an orchestra of neurons.
This leads us to a fierce debate in cognitive science regarding whether language is actually necessary for complex thought, or if the inner voice is merely a translator for deeper, silent computations. For a long time, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis suggested that the language we speak determines the thoughts we can have, implying that without an inner voice formatted in English, Spanish, or Japanese, we couldn't think complex concepts. However, modern research into unsymbolized thinking challenges this, revealing that many people experience clear, distinct thoughts without any accompanying words or images. You might have the sudden realization that you left the stove on, a complex understanding of cause and effect, without ever mentally saying the sentence, "I left the stove on." This suggests that the inner voice is often just the tip of the iceberg, a post hoc rationalization mechanism that puts a linguistic label on thoughts that have already occurred in the silent, lightning-fast depths of the non-verbal brain, essentially narrating a movie that has already been filmed. One of the most unsettling theories about this narration comes from split brain research, which gave rise to the concept of the left brain interpreter.
In the mid-20th century, neuroscientists discovered that when the connection between the two hemispheres of the brain is severed, they can operate independently. In experiments where the non-verbal right brain was given a command to stand up, the patient would stand. When asked why they stood, the verbal left brain, which had no idea why the action occurred, would immediately fabricate a reason via the inner voice, such as, "I wanted to stretch my legs." This implies that a significant function of your inner voice is not to make decisions, but to create a coherent story that explains your actions after you have already taken them. It suggests that much of what you consider to be your logical reasoning is actually your inner narrator scrambling to make sense of subconscious impulses, tirelessly weaving a thread of consistency to convince you that you are a rational agent in control of your destiny. As we move from biological mysteries to technological frontiers, we find that the secrecy of the inner voice is on the verge of being breached by brain-computer interfaces. Scientists at MIT and NASA have developed silent speech interfaces that can read the inner voice by detecting the subtle neuromuscular signals sent from the brain to the jaw and throat. Even when you are not speaking aloud, your brain sends instructions to your vocal cords to form the words you are thinking, a phenomenon known as subvocalization. By placing electrodes along the jawline, these devices can intercept those signals and translate them into text or synthesized speech with remarkable accuracy, effectively allowing a computer to hear the words you are saying in your head. This technology is being developed to aid people who have lost the ability to speak, but it also opens a Pandora's box regarding the privacy of the mind, blurring the final boundary between our private internal worlds and the public external reality. The development of such technology forces us to confront the ethical implications of mental privacy, asking whether the inner voice is the last true sanctuary of the self. Currently, the legal and social concepts of privacy are built around actions, written words, and spoken conversations, but the inner monologue has always been assumed to be inaccessible. If future neurotechnology allows for the remote decoding of subvocalization or semantic thought, it would fundamentally alter the human condition, making the private rehearsal of ideas, secret criticisms, or intimate reflections subject to surveillance. This potential reality invites a profound question about the nature of solitude and safety. If you knew that technology existed that could potentially broadcast your internal monologue to a device or another person, how would that change the way you speak to yourself in the safety of your own mind? And would you feel the need to censor your own thoughts before they even formed? This potential exposure is terrifying because for many, the inner voice is the primary construct of identity, creating what philosopher Daniel Dennett calls the center of narrative gravity. We tend to believe there is a specific self inside our heads doing the thinking, but many cognitive scientists argue that the self is actually a product of the story the voice is telling. The inner voice stitches together memories of the past, experiences of the present, and simulations of the future into a single, continuous timeline, creating the illusion that the you of 5 years ago is the same entity as the you of today. Without this narrative thread constantly running in the background, human consciousness might feel more like a series of disjointed, momentary experiences rather than a unified life. In this view, you are not the author of the voice, you are the character being written by it, a construct sustained by the perpetual storytelling of the brain's language centers.
We must also consider the silence of other minds, specifically the ongoing debate about whether animals possess any form of inner, voice-like experience. While animals certainly think, feel, and problem solve, they likely do not have a linguistic inner monologue because they lack the complex grammatical structures of human language. However, leading animal cognition experts hypothesize that intelligent animals like corvids, cetaceans, and primates may possess a sensory inner voice, thinking in sequences of auditory memories, smells, and visual replays rather than words.
A dog might not say to itself, "The owner is home," but might internally trigger the specific sound of the car door slamming and the emotional texture of excitement. This suggests that the inner voice is just one evolutionary flavor of internal simulation, and that the animal kingdom is filled with rich, non-verbal internal worlds that are just as vivid and guiding as our word-based streams of consciousness. When the brain's mechanism for distinguishing between this internal simulation and external reality breaks down, we encounter the phenomenon of auditory hallucinations, which reveals the fragile neurology of the inner voice. In healthy functioning, the brain tags internal speech with a specific neural signature that says, "I produced this," allowing you to recognize the voice as your own. This is called source monitoring. Research into schizophrenia and psychosis has shown that these conditions often involve a failure in this specific tagging mechanism. The person is still generating the inner speech, but the brain fails to predict and claim the sound, causing the conscious mind to perceive it as coming from an external source. This confirms that the feeling of ownership over your inner voice is an active biological process, not a given fact. Your brain must constantly work to convince you that the voice in your head belongs to you. Conversely, there are states of being where the goal is to intentionally shut down this voice to achieve peak performance, often referred to as flow states, or in Zen Buddhism, mushin, or no mind. High-level athletes, jazz musicians, and surgeons often report that during their most complex and perfect performances, the inner voice goes completely silent. Neuroimaging studies of people in these flow states show a phenomenon called hypofrontality, where the prefrontal cortex, the center of self-monitoring and chatty analysis, temporarily down-regulates. This silence allows the brain's implicit muscle memory systems to execute complex tasks at a speed that verbal thought would only hinder. It is a beautiful irony of the human mind that while the inner voice is our tool for planning and learning, our greatest mastery is often displayed only when we finally manage to quiet the narrator and simply exist in the action. Ultimately, the existence of the voice inside your mind remains one of the greatest marvels of evolution, a distinct feature that allows humans to escape the tyranny of the present moment. Unlike any other known creature, the inner voice allows you to travel through time, to relive a lesson from the past to ensure survival, or to simulate a future danger without actually having to face it. It is a survival engine that has allowed our species to test hypotheses, practice social interactions, and build civilizations, all within the safety of our cranial vault before lifting a finger. Whether it is a spiritual companion, a harsh critic, a random noise generator, or a chaotic storyteller, this voice is the constant witness to your existence, the narrator that turns the biological process of living into the story of a life. And as that final thought settles into the quiet of your mind, remember that you can nurture this inner world with more calming knowledge every night. If you enjoyed this journey into the mind, please subscribe to the channel for more relaxing, educational deep dives to help you drift off. Good night.